if you haven't already, follow those important setup instructions that you see in that pod below the picture of the museum. Most importantly, make sure all other programs are closed out on your computer. That'll help Adobe Connect run a lot faster. And hopefully you can hear me, but if you can't hear me loud enough, if you go to the audio setup wizard, you can adjust your external speaker volume and make sure that it's an optimal experience for viewing for you all. Also, so what's going to happen today is for about the first 20 minutes or so, I will spend some time reviewing just a short review of the attack on Pearl Harbor. And then the rest of the program is dedicated to Mr. Salsbury and his book. So next to me right now, you can't see him, he's off camera, but is the Director of Education, Kenneth Hoffman. There's his hand. And so he will be, when we get into the main presentation room, he will be answering your questions in the Q&A pod. We'll try to answer whatever we can in the time that we have, but there might be lots of questions, and we'll try to get to as many as possible. And then after that, once we're kind of done with our presentation, we'll turn it over to Graham. And then in that same Q&A pod, we'll want you to type questions specifically for him and about the book. So the first 20 minutes is kind of a historical overview, and then the last about half an hour or so are all about the book. So that is what we'll be doing today. I'm going to transition now into that presentation area. Give it a second or two. Okay, so now, once it's all loaded, you all should see something that says Under the Blood-Red Sun. You should see the Q&A pod below. And so as I said, we're going to spend the first 20 minutes or so reviewing the attack on Pearl Harbor. The 72nd anniversary is tomorrow, December 7th. So we kind of break it down as 3 things you need to know about Pearl Harbor in this 20 minutes or so we have together. And here are the 3 things, at least in our book here at the National World War II Museum. We need to learn, why did the Japanese attack Pearl Harbor? Number 2 is, how did the Japanese attack Pearl Harbor? And number 3 is, what happened after the attack? And I think for students, sometimes the most important one is question 1, so we'll spend the most time on that today. So sometimes actually to understand history, sometimes looking at maps is the best resource you have to really try to grasp what's going on. And that's what we'll be doing today. So before we actually get to the attack itself, we'll be talking about Japan in the 1930s and how Japan wanted to become a more powerful country in the world. They wanted to become a world presence. But the problem was Japan lacked a lot of stuff to do that. So as I said, we're answering our first question here. And there's Japan, I've just highlighted in red right there. Now, there are a lot of things that a country needs to be powerful and strong, but we're just going to talk about 3 basic ones today. And these 3 things are food, natural resources, and fuel. And the problem was that Japan lacked a lot of these things to really become a strong and powerful country. They needed to find these things elsewhere. But instead of trading for these things, Japan decided, as you can see, here are these things elsewhere, all across the Pacific. You see plenty of abundant farmland and natural resources, natural rubber from rubber trees, lumber, and fuel. And what Japan decides to do, instead of trading for these items with these countries and with these territories, is to invade and take these very precious resources. And so here's Japan again, and in 1931 they invade an area called Manchuria. They rename this area Manchukuo, and they create a puppet state, which means that Japan can start using all of these resources from Manchuria. But there's a problem here, and the problem is you have to have a reason for invading these countries, and Japan had to provide some sort of reason for the rest of the world. And this was their reason. As you can see, during this time in the Pacific, there were a lot of Western colonies. I'm bringing up some British ones right now on the screen. Just like the United States was a colony of Great Britain many, many years ago, there were still Western colonies in the Pacific at this time. So you can see all the British ones on the screen. You can see the French one right there. Here's a couple more that you see coming up on the screen. Dutch, and of course a couple more Portuguese as well. And even the United States had a territory at this time in the Pacific, and that is kind of smack dab in the middle of all of it, the Philippines right there. So you can see all these Western powers controlling the Pacific, and what Japan was saying is that we are going to, in some ways, kick out these Western powers and make Asia for Asians. And so they all go away, and this comes into being the Greater East Asian Co-Prosperity Sphere. Whew, that's a mouthful. I hope you don't have to remember it for a test. But what that basically means is ridding this area of these Western powers, and now Japan is taking over the rule of these areas. And this was interpreted in a couple different ways all across the world, and that is what I'm going to show you in a second, some propaganda. But for right now, as you can see now, Japan is beginning to conquer all of these different territories. First Manchuria, and then they go into China in 1937 and wage a very, very bloody war, killing millions of civilians. Next, Japan goes into French Indochina. That term doesn't really exist today anymore, but that's today's Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos. And then they set their sights on Malaysia and the Dutch East Indies. And this is actually when the United States becomes very concerned, because as you guys know, as we pointed out earlier, there is the Philippines right there, held by the United States. And it's kind of, as I said, smack dab in the middle of all of this. And so the U.S. decides to act, but not necessarily to go to war yet. And as I said, there are two sides of the story here, two ways that it was really interpreted. And one way we can really examine that is through propaganda. And I'm going to show you these two propaganda pieces in 1 second, but actually this brings up our first poll question. Now, if you all haven't done this with us before, we periodically bring up poll questions in these programs to have you guys vote or send in your responses. So my first poll question for you all today that I'm going to open up is, what is propaganda? And that should come up on your screen really big. And different from other polls, sometimes we have you all select. This time, I want you to type in your answer, and I want you guys to, and then I will see them and maybe read some of the best ones aloud. So maybe have a representative from the class come in and type in and say, what is your definition of propaganda? Okay, so we have some people saying advertisement. Very good. A form of political advertisement. Those are the most common things I'm getting. Great responses, you guys. I think you can all see them. Well, actually, maybe you can't. Maybe I'll broadcast the results so you can see them too. A way to influence people. Very, very good. Biased. Oh, all these great responses. Good job, you guys. All right, I'm going to close this poll for right now. Those were all great responses. Yeah, and so propaganda is biased information spread by a group or government that's used to influence how people think or how people behave. And let's look at two examples right here now. The one that you see on the left is actually a Japanese piece of propaganda. And it looks very different from the one on the right. So the one on the left shows a Manchurian, Chinese, and Japanese child walking arm in arm. You see that the Japanese child is the largest. He's holding the flag in the middle. And there is a dove at the top, which you all know probably symbolizes peace. And the writing at the bottom says, with Japanese, Chinese, and Manchu working together, a great peace can be brought to this world. So that's how the Japanese government was really trying to sell this Greater East Asian Co-Prosperity Sphere to the rest of the world. But actually, if you take a look on the right, this is a very different interpretation. This is a piece from a Dutch, this is Dutch propaganda here, and it shows this octopus and its tentacles are going around the Philippines. Behind the octopus's head, you see the Japanese flag, so taking over these territories. And that translates into the Indies must be free. So again, two different sides to the story here that are being portrayed and painted in history. So, as I said, the U.S. decides, though, they're concerned about their territory in the Pacific. And so the U.S. does not want to go to war yet, but we decide to act. And this is what we just do, two things. First, the United States cuts off oil and steel exports to Japan. And so no longer can Japan trade for these items with us. Actually, Japan gets about 80% of its foreign oil from us. That would make you pretty angry if you can no longer get these items, these very precious items you need to expand your territory. Next, the Pacific Fleet, which is stationed in San Diego, California, moves to Pearl Harbor, Hawaii in February of 1941, so we can be a little bit closer to the situation going on in the Pacific and hopefully act faster if necessary. So these are the two steps that the United States takes to prepare. So that brings me up to our first, second quiz question for the day. It works a little bit differently than the other one. This one is actually where you vote. So let me bring it up a little bigger. And so you see, why did the Japanese attack Pearl Harbor? And I want you to vote for your reason why, and then I will broadcast the results from what you just learned. Okay, someone just said the texts are too small for them to read on screen, so I'm actually going to read this question aloud for you guys. Why did the Japanese attack Pearl Harbor? Is it A, to protect their growing empire from U.S. interference, B, to show the world that Asians were better than Westerners, C, because the Japanese people hated American people, or D, as revenge for taking the Philippines? And it looks like we have some results coming in, so I'm going to broadcast them right now. And you guys can see how you did. It looks like 85.1% voted for A, to protect their growing empire from U.S. interference. Very good. The U.S. was becoming concerned about their territories in the Pacific and decided to intervene, and Japan was upset by that. Very good. To protect their growing empire from U.S. interference. All right. So we go on to our second question. I know this is quick review here. And that is, how did the Japanese attack Pearl Harbor? And let me show you actually a Japanese map of the attack right here. So what happened is, instead of planes flying all the way from Japan to Hawaii, they couldn't do that back then. They couldn't fly that far and then come back to Japan. Our technology is much more sophisticated today. So what the Japanese decided to do was bring the planes as close as possible to Pearl Harbor. And how did they do that? Well, by aircraft carriers. So 6 aircraft carriers left Japan on November 26th of 1941. And it took them a few days to get there, but eventually these aircraft carriers anchored about 260 miles or so northwest of Hawaii, of Oahu, December 7th of 1941. So bringing the planes as close as they possibly could to launch an attack. And this is a new way of fighting. Using aircraft carriers became really, really important in the war in the Pacific. So actually, how I want to at least do this today is to recount the attack, is actually to use our text from Under the Blood-Red Sun. Now, if you guys have this version in front of you right here, we're going to be reading from page 113, which you see on the screen if you want to read along. And this is how our main characters experience the attack in the book. So feel free to read along for a little bit. So it's Sunday, December 7th at 7:55 a.m. The rumbling grew in the distance. More planes dotted the sky like a swirl of flies, some circling out over the ocean, some heading towards the mountains and banking back towards Pearl Harbor. We'd be better off hiding in the jungle, Billy said. They're not going to bomb trees. Kaboom! The earth rocked. A shudder rumbled through the dirt under my feet. There, Billy said, pointing to a cloud of black smoke rolling skyward. It looked like it was over the ridge near our school. You couldn't tell for sure. Another plane burst past and shot up the valley. A wide path of earth and trees shivered beneath it. It was so close you could see the rivets on the wings and the red sun. And that is how our main characters in the book felt the attack on Pearl Harbor. And of course we'll be hearing from Graham a little bit later on this topic, but I wanted to bring it up now. And as you all might know, it was a secret attack in the morning of December 7th of 1941 by not just only planes, but submarines under the waves as well. And here are some statistics on the attack. 19 ships, including 8 battleships, the one you might know is the USS Arizona, they were destroyed or damaged. 328 American aircraft destroyed or damaged. And in all, it was a horrible day. 2,471 Americans were killed, including 68 civilians. About half of this death toll actually came from the USS Arizona, which its forward magazine was struck by a Japanese bomb. And it still rests today in Pearl Harbor, and you can visit it if you have the opportunity to go to Hawaii one day. All right, I know that was quick, and we're going to our number 3 lickety-split, and it's what happened after the attack on Pearl Harbor. And there's a very famous speech that happened after the attack on Pearl Harbor that I will play for you in 1 second. It's called the Day of Infamy Speech, where Franklin Delano Roosevelt, our president at the time, is asking Congress to declare war on Japan. But before I actually play the speech, I want to hear from you one more time. And this is maybe more of a question for your English class, but does anybody know what infamy means? This is the Day of Infamy Speech I'm about to play for you. Now vote, what does infamy mean? And so here are the responses. So A, being known for something good. B, being known for something bad. C, being known for something funny. Or D, being a part of a family. I'll let you guys input your votes for the next few seconds. All right, looks like we might have an overwhelming majority here. Whew, 100%. You guys are smart. For B, being known for something bad. And that is, you're going.
December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan.
Okay, so there is just the beginning of that famous speech to Congress where Roosevelt asks for them to declare war on Japan. And it does happen almost unanimously. And so the United States is now at war, actually not only in the Pacific, but now even in Europe. Unfortunately, we don't have enough time to talk about that today. But now we have to mobilize. We have to get ready for war. And the United States did. And you can see we mobilized in a couple ways. One, our military mobilized. Before World War II, we had a not very large military at all. And then through enlistment and through the draft, we had 11 million people in our U.S. Army, 4 million in the Navy, and 700,000 in the Marine Corps, which totals to about 16 million people in our military, the largest military we've ever had in our history. And if you weren't maybe serving in the military, you might be working in a defense factory, building all of these things we need to win the war. Planes, tanks, ships, jeeps, weapons, uniforms, all of those things that we needed, our military needed to succeed. And sometimes factories were open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. People were working double shifts to do anything they could to support the war effort. Here's just a short list I'm going to put on screen of the things that we built. And it's astounding, just this list in and of itself. 107 aircraft carriers, 352 destroyers, that's a type of larger ship, 88,000 tanks, 300,000 airplanes, 26 million machine guns, and 41 billion bullets. all in the only 3.5 years or so that the United States was involved in the war. So people really stepped up to the challenge. And we were able to not only fight in the Pacific, but also in Europe, and eventually be successful and be a part of winning the war. So here's our quick wrap-up of the 3 things we need to know about Pearl Harbor and lightning speed. First is why. Why did the Japanese attack Pearl Harbor? To prevent further U.S. interference in Japanese expansion. How did they attack Pearl Harbor? It was a secret attack on December 7th of 1941 by aircraft carrier-based airplanes and by small submarines. And then the what. What happened after? The U.S. quickly and successfully mobilized for World War. All right, did we do that fast enough for you all? So those were our 3 questions, but actually I lied. I have a 4th question. And actually that 4th question is who? Who are we talking to next? And we're actually talking to Graham Salisbury, the author of Under the BloodRed Sun and many other books. You can see them on screen. I'm going to invite him right now to unmute his microphone and start his webcam, and hopefully we'll be able to see and hear him shortly. And then your job is for you all to start inputting questions. There he is. Hello, Graham. Welcome. Aloha. I like that. All right. Well, we have a lot of classrooms in here that are eager not to hear from me, but to hear from you, of course. And so they will be inputting questions in this little Q&A pod below. And we'll take some of the the ones that are most frequently asked, or the ones that we think are really great, and we'll have you answer them. But actually, to start, what I'd like you to do, if you don't mind, is to give everybody just a brief description of what this book is about, just in case we might have some people in the audience that might not have read it yet. So let's get everybody kind of up to speed.
A young person in Honolulu on the day Pearl Harbor was bombed. My family's been in Hawaii since 1820. So, of course, we were around. I wasn't born yet. I was still to come. But on December 7th, 1941, my grandparents lived about 5 miles away from Pearl Harbor and were affected by this horrific event. And so later on in my life, as I became a writer, I started to wonder, what I know that would be interesting. So I wanted to explore what it would have been like on that day. So that's basically what Under the BloodRed Sun is about.
Great. So you told me that you're telling the audience that you grew up in Hawaii and your family's been there for a long time now. Now, when you were a student, when you were growing up, did you want to be a writer?
When I was growing up, as I was a big fan of people like Elvis Presley and the Everly Brothers and the Beach Boys and such, and that's what I wanted to do, and I did give that a shot. However, later in life, I became a few other things. People who are kind of artsy, we're kind of scattered, and I've done several things in my life, but I stumbled upon writing by accident, so that's how I became a writer. It's not something I aspired to.
Stumbled upon it. I like it. So I know that a lot of your books are about Hawaii itself, of course, including this one. So is that one of the topics you enjoy writing about? What else do you really like writing about in your books?
Stories set in Hawaii, and that's because kids in Hawaii are always reading about you guys on the mainland, and they never get to read about themselves. So I thought it would be nice for them to have their own author who just focuses on them. So everything I write is set in the islands, and I'm very comfortable doing that.
That's great. Could you tell me a little bit more? You said that, getting back maybe to, sorry, I can't help it, we're the National World War II Museum, getting back to history, the history side of things. Can you tell me either your grandparents or you said your father's experience about the attack on Pearl Harbor, what they saw that day?
Yet met my mother. He wasn't in our life yet, but he was a young ensign. And as a matter of fact, he is mentioned in the famous book, Day of Infamy, which is this one here, which is all about Pearl Harbor. and he's Lieutenant Henry or Hank Graham is his name, so he's on page
cool.
163 or something like that. But yeah, he was there, and he had just gotten off his ship to go to church early that Sunday morning, December 7th, 1941. He was walking away from his ship, and they saw these planes coming to the pass above Schofield Barracks, and then coming around by Barber's Point, and all coming down to swirl around Pearl Harbor, and then suddenly, the world fell apart, and all my father could do on that day was help put out fires and save people's lives. And he did survive Pearl Harbor and went on to become a Navy pilot, flew off aircraft carriers in the South Pacific. And then he almost made it through the war, but he was shot down and killed on my first birthday, 2 months before the World War ended. So, at least the war in the Pacific ended. So, I never really knew my dad. I just know that anybody can fly a small plane off an aircraft carrier in a huge ocean has got to have a lot of guts. So, my dad was a gutsy guy and smart. So, at least I have that.
Right. Yeah. I think I've learned that too with working here, that there are a lot of things that I see that brave young men and women did in the war that I know that I probably couldn't do myself. So, I feel like we're encountered by these amazing stories, including the one of your father, on an everyday basis with World War II, and that's why, one of the reasons, we, here at the museum really like to examine it further. So, my next question for you, and I don't want to steal too many student ones, so I'm looking at some so I hopefully don't steal any of theirs, is that what kind of messages do you hope students take away from this book and take away from these characters that you write about?
I also have a series of books for younger readers called Calvin Coconut, and in every book I write, I have a sub-purpose that sort of sits in my subconscious, really. It's not something I consciously do, but that just comes out because it's who I am. When I was growing up, I had 3 fathers, but I never knew any of them. My second father, who was also a Navy man, died when I was 10 years old, and then my mother married her third husband, and he was totally inaccessible. I mean, if you'd ask him a question, his answer would come in grunts like, rah, rah, rah. So I really couldn't learn anything from anyone, so I was sort of on my own. In the 7th grade, my mom sent me away to a boarding school. It was an all-boys school, and it was like being sent into the Army, which is something I thought was awesome. So here I was at this boys' school, and in these barracks and such, and I just had a great time because for the first time in my life, I was given something I really needed, and that's called limits. And once I had limits, I started to grow, and the headmaster of that school would talk to us about values and virtues, things like friendship, loyalty, hard work, and this is the kind of stuff that goes into my book. So I like to talk about those values because being a traditional American, I really believe in what we stand for as a country, and I want that to be part of what I do, part of what I write, is part of my message. So that's basically why I write.
Mhm. That's great. Now, was this book in some ways, or I guess in any of the books you write, is it sometimes difficult to envision and shape these characters, or do you pick them from your life and your experiences?
I mean, it kind of has to, because I have to know a sensibility to write about a sensibility. However, I don't base my novels. Well, I shouldn't say that. At least all my Calvin Coconuts are sort of based on me growing up, and a lot of my historical novels, I use people from history or people that I've talked to, and I mold their stories, their actual experiences into my fiction. So there is a lot of that going on. But in creating my main characters, I'm basically inventing them out of nothing. I don't find that terribly difficult. I find it actually kind of thrilling. it's really a lot of fun to be a writer. I mean, you can make things happen, and you can make them happen. It's really an exciting thing to do, to be a writer. However, I must say that in writing Under the Blood-Red Sun, which to this date I've written 20 books, Under the Blood-Red Sun is my most popular book, and it has been that way all along. And I had to write that book 2 times. So those of you in classrooms, when your teacher says, have you looked at your work? Have you read it? Have you revised it? And you go, no. Well, I want to tell you, if you want to do well in any class or any subject or anything in your life, you've got to think about it, and you've got to read it over and rework it until it's the best you can do, because you don't want to give somebody something that's not your best work. I mean, that just doesn't speak well for you. So what I did is I wrote Under the Blood-Red Sun from Billy's point of view. It was the first time I wrote it, and I gave it to my editor, and she said, well, this isn't your best work. This doesn't have a heartbeat. And I go, really? She gave me 300 pages back and said, try again. So I said, okay, I like the story. What am I going to do? I got into Tomi's head, and I became Tomikazu. And that story just flowed out of me, and it had a heartbeat from page 1. Why? What's the difference? Well, here's the difference. Tomi in the book is much more like me, because I grew up in Hawaii as he did. Billy in the book was a haole from the mainland who came over. What did I know about his life? I knew way more about Tomi's life. That's why that book sang for me. So I learned a big lesson on getting into the proper point of view before telling a story. So there's a lot to be said for thinking. And, I struggle with thinking. Like I'm an artist. What do I know about thinking? I know about feeling, right? So, this is what I've learned.
Right. Yeah. So, is your advice to students who are enjoying writing and are
really,
burgeoning writers, to keep on going, keep writing more drafts, keep trying again,
really
that sort of thing?
I mean, because if you think about it, say your teacher says write a 50-word essay. Okay, you write 50 words, and then you read it. It's okay. When you think about it and you try to make it a little bit better, and you take the words that are kind of dull words, like say, he walked through the door. Okay, you see somebody walking through the door. But if you say, he shouldered his way through the door, then you see a big guy coming through the door, right? So the words you use help to create images in the reader's mind. So these are the things you think about when you're revising. You say, I could make that sentence better just by using these words. Or I can make this work by reordering these sentences, putting the exciting part at the end. It's really fun, guys. I know you don't believe me, but it's really fun. Revision is my favorite thing to do.
Yeah. Oh, I know. That sounds, when you're working on a paper, revising is like, oh gosh, stressful. But having that sort of mindset totally turns it around. And actually, speaking of students, I thought I'd actually take some of our first few really great questions. This kind of relates to one that you just talked about, but a lot of students are asking, how long did it take you to write? Well, one, to write Under the Blood-Red Sun. I know you said a couple revisions, but generally, how long does it take you to write a full book?
Start to finish, because those are, a lot shorter for one thing, and they're just me being silly, but having a good point being silly. I'm not being silly just to be silly. But in a book like Under the Blood-Red Sun, I have a lot of research to do, and I really enjoy that part because I do a lot of book research, I do online research, and I go to the library. But really the best thing that I do for my historical novels, if I can possibly do it, is try to do some primary researches, where I go out there and I try to find people who were actually there. And I did for all 3 of my war books, Under the Blood-Red Sun, House of the Red Fish, and Eyes of the Emperor, and my new one that I'm working on right now. I've talked to people who were there, and the things that they tell me are often so powerful and stuff that most people have never heard, that I'm just going, wow, thank you so much. So if you could talk to somebody, just think of your grandparents, for heaven's sake. Go talk to your grandfather. What did you do when you were younger? Or your grandmother, what did you do? And you will find stories that, that come out of them that you never heard before. So that's a really good way to do research. It's called primary research. Well, yes.
So since you were speaking about your new book, can you give students a sneak peek about what you're writing about right now?
And my new book is called Hunt for the Bamboo Rat, and it takes place in Honolulu and the Philippines. It's a story based on a Japanese-American by the name of Richard Sakakita, who was used as a translator for the army, but also as a spy. And his story is an amazing story. So that's basically what I'm following. However, it's entirely fictional, but I'm using his path as the pathway of my story. And I've got to say, I really like the way this is coming out, and I'm hoping that it's very exciting to those of you who read it. It should be out about fall of next year. Hunt for the Bamboo Rat. So yes, it takes place in the Philippines. I gotta say, Chrissy.
Great. Well, students and teachers, keep an eye out for that next installment from Graham. I've got a few more questions too. But yeah, sorry, I cut you off.
I've been revising, so.
Oh my gosh, that's serious.
Go ahead.
Wow. So we've got a couple from students asking you about your youth. What was your favorite subject in school, and kind of maybe on a somewhat related note, then, how old were you when you wrote your first book? Were you relatively, were you jotting down notes when you were a student? I know you said the last thing you thought of was being a writer, but what were those inspirations then to eventually become a writer?
In a sense, I have been a writer. However, it's a totally different kind of thing. In high school, my favorite subject would have been geography, especially Pacific geography. And in college, yeah, right behind you there. My favorite subject in college was geology. And the only reason that those two classes were my favorites were because I had really outstanding teachers who made the subject come alive for me. I mean, they were outstanding. So that's why I like those two courses. As a writer, I should have enjoyed English, but I was not good in English in high school. And when I went to college, I flunked English 2 times. And the third time I took it, I got a straight A, because I had changed by that time. I had changed my attitude about learning. And it's all about attitude, I can go on and on about attitude and how to get good grades in school if you want to hear that. But anyway, yeah, I became a writer later in life, in my 40s, and I'm now 109. So that was a while back. I just kind of stumbled on writing by accident, and that's a whole other story. But it wasn't something I aspired to. Okay.
Yeah. Well, so the next couple questions I have are kind of related in some ways to what the students read about in the book. And the first one is, do you still see prejudice towards Japanese and Japanese-Americans in Hawaii today? Like we see, with the arrest of Tomi and his father and grandfather?
Their broken reputation, I guess. I'm not sure what word to use there, but after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, they all became suspect, and they had to work really hard to rebuild what they had lost, and they've done an outstanding job. I don't see that prejudice today in the islands. As a matter of fact, Japanese Americans there are very well thought of and are very successful people, and I am just a great admirer of their story, which is why focus on them. They're just amazing people.
And then this one is also related to the book and kind of drawing from your personal experiences.
Well, I got into my share of
one
scrapes,
student asked, "Were you ever bullied by anyone like
probably
Pete?"
Every fight I got into was my problem to begin with, but I was a pretty peaceable guy. I got along with everybody, and I didn't have that kind of trouble. However, I did see it going on around me. And here's a little aside. You may know that we are filming under the BloodRed Sun at the moment. And the young man that we got, his name is Bryce Moore, who we got to play Keith Wilson, is perfect for the part. And when you see the movie, he's just perfect for the part. He comes off as the meanest guy, but you know what? In real life, he's the nicest guy. So it's real. Yeah.
Right. He's a good actor. Great. Well, let me actually, since you brought it up, let me show some pictures from it on this next slide. You can see. So I will preface and say that Graham, for the past, has it been about a month? The last month you were in Hawaii filming, or longer than that? All right. Yeah. Yeah, about a month. Graham is the screenwriter of the film production of Under the BloodRed Sun. So you guys not only tune in for his next books, but also this movie coming out. And you can see on screen some images of them filming. And actually, Graham, is that you with the actors playing Tomi, right?
The most brilliant faces. Yeah.
So the people that you all cast, even the kids, are they all professional actors? Or these kind of people that they found scouting? You're like, you would be the perfect Tomi. You would be the perfect Keith.
Grouping this cast together, and everyone in the cast and the crew is local, all from Hawaii except for one actor, Chris Tashima, who is our Academy Award-winning actor from Los Angeles, and he plays Papa. But all of these people have done a little bit of acting. Some of them are more professional than others, but they're all equally as talented.
So I guess my next question for you is: was it difficult? Now, so you wrote the book. Was it?
I don't even know how I did.
Difficult to write the screenplay? How did you envision translating it to now film?
The producer who optioned this film said, "Well, why don't you write the screenplay?" I said, "Well, I've never written a screenplay. Are you kidding?" She said, "Well, just give it a shot." So I did, and I found that I really enjoyed writing the screenplay. It was really a lot of fun because, as a writer, my strong point is dialogue. And movies are all about dialogue. So I found it perhaps easier than some might. So I just looked at all the dialogue in my book. Now, of course, a movie's a lot briefer than a book. And I have to kind of get to the point in the movie. So I had to leave a lot out. And I also had to create a few new scenes to make it more movie friendly that aren't in the book. So it has a different beginning than the book does. And it has a different ending than the book does, which offers it a little bit of closure. So when you see the movie, it'll be a little bit different, but equally as good, I believe. I'm very excited about the script and the way it came out. Well, when I got to Hawaii,
all right. Well, our students are wondering: Are you in the movie? Are you having a cameo at any point?
But I have to say anything? And they said, "No, you don't have to say anything." Well, I ended up saying one thing. I said, "Have a good day, boys." So yes, I play Mr. Davis, and basically all I do in the movie is drive them to school and
dropping them off at school, right, or something fun. Like that.
I got all dressed up like 1941 and. Big old round glasses. Oh, it was awesome. It was really. I guess I could.
Great.
Writer and basic.
Well, now you can add actor to your resume, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to go back to Honolulu in January.
And they're also wondering, when do you think the movie will come out? I know you have a little bit of filming left to do, right?
We are hoping to have this movie ready to go by maybe August or September of 2014. So, and it's an independent film. It'll be premiering in various locations across the country. And of course, it'll be available on DVD and all the other sources. And as far as theaters go, I have no knowledge of that. It depends on distributing. But definitely.
Yeah, yeah. Well, great. So yeah, tune in, and yeah, maybe we'll see it on the big screen, which will be exciting. And I guess, can you talk a little bit more about how how it was to be a part of the filming process in Hawaii? I mean, I'm sure it was thrilling,
Yes, it
but
was.
being able to interact with
Enjoyable.
the actors
It
and
was a
shaping the
totally new
scenes, I mean,
experience
was
for
that?
me.
I mean, I'm sure a totally
I
new
have a
experience,
very
but it had to be fun,
large
right?
appreciation for all the work the crew goes through just to set up a scene. And there's a lot of setting up and then filming, then tearing down and moving to another place and setting up and filming and tearing down. I mean, these guys work hard. And we didn't have one day that was shorter than 10 hours, and the average was about a 12-hour day. And the days just zoomed by. I never found any of it to be a drudge. It was all fun, and the people were absolutely wonderful. These are really highly professional, skilled cast and crew that I was working with. So I was just honored to be there among them.
That's great. Well, I'm trying to think, Kenneth, do we have any more questions coming in? Oh yeah, since tomorrow is the anniversary, and
Well, I have a
your
picture of my
family,
father.
really did experience
I
Pearl
should
Harbor. Is
probably
there a way
get
that
that
you
in
commemorate
one
it
in my
every year
office
and
here. But I have a
remember the
picture of my
day?
father, and it's framed, and around him are all his war medals. And so I kind of look at him and say, "Have a good day, Dad." So
Wow.
I'm just extremely thankful for what everyone in World War II did.
Yeah.
To preserve freedoms in the world. I'm a very patriotic guy, and I honor all of our veterans and all the people in the military now, and also am very thankful for police and nurses and all the people. I call them angels, all of them, because without them, where would we be? These are really fine people.
Great. Well, I really appreciate you sharing that, and we hope that you all watching with us all across the country will try to remember tomorrow's anniversary in a really special and unique way too. If you ever get a chance to actually go to Hawaii, and maybe some of you have been out in the audience, or maybe even some we're talking to maybe some people from Hawaii now too, to visit the USS Arizona Memorial, and I'm sure they have a lot going on there as well too tomorrow. But on that note, I want to say, Graham, thank you so much for being with us today. It was just a pleasure and a joy to talk to you and hear about Under the Blood-Red Sun, and I'm sure everybody out here feels the same way.
Totally
so we really,
pleasure,
really
and
appreciate
all
the
of
time
you
that you
who
spent
have
with us
come
today,
into this
especially
webinar
the
to
day
join
before
us.
such a big
Thank
anniversary.
you so much for doing that. You honor me, you honor the veterans, you honor everybody that's worked so hard to put this together. So thank you, and this has been a blast. I'd do it anytime for you, Chrissy.
Awesome. Well, we might bug you again then for it too. So, and I wanted to tell everybody to, of course, keep an eye out for the film production of Under the Blood-Red Sun, Graham's new book, and then also,
Right,
I guess,
and you
just
had
briefly
that
tell
book in
us
your
too.
screen
There
a
is
moment ago, but here
a
is
sequel to this, right? House of the Redfish, that picks up
Yes.
Tomi's story again. Correct?
It just continues the story of Under the Blood-Red Sun. And then I have another companion novel
There it is.
called Eyes of the Emperor. There it is. Eyes of the Emperor, and this is a companion to it. There is a small link between the stories. So
There
this
it
one
is.
is also very well thought of. It's used in a lot of schools across the country. And then I'll have Hunt for the Bamboo Rat, and next fall you'll see all of these 4 books rebranded into new covers, and it'll be a very exciting event.
Awesome. Well, so you guys have a lot to read. So that's your next challenge is now your assignment from me to you all is to read the rest of the companion novels about Tomi and his family. So again, thanks again, Graham. I'm going to actually switch into a new little area, and I'm just going to give out a few announcements before we close out today, and you guys can see them, this little notes area. Teachers, if you want to be a part of our Calling All Teachers monthly e-newsletter, you can submit your email address in the chat pod. We also have a website, an online exhibit about the attack on Pearl Harbor, Guam, the Philippines, and Wake Island called Infamy December1941.org. Our education department also puts out a few materials about Pearl Harbor, and you can find the link there. And you can also download, you see at the bottom, this files download right here. You can download some lesson plans and some educational information from our department. And then on the last note, we have another webinar in 2014 coming up about the Monuments Men. That's another book turned film by author Robert Edsel. He'll actually be here next to me here in New Orleans, and I think that date, I will say tentatively now, is January 23rd, 2014. But keep an eye out on our website about it too. So,
Aloha.